Hey everybody, welcome to the videos where we're breaking down the Thursday Night Football Showdown Slate, the Jaguars versus the Dolphins, which isn't going to get a lot of people excited. It doesn't sound like the best matchup in the world, but I wouldn't sleep on this game. I think it's got some decent potential. We have a nice 48-point over-under with only a 3-point spread, and you have the battle of facial hair as well. You got Minshew rocking the stats, and you got Fitzpatrick with that massive beard he owns, and it's just NFL football in general, so of course we're going to be excited for it. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. We're all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players, and they cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you want to follow me on social media, my handle's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. We got over 300 members. You can hop into the Discord chat, and you get access into all my entire NFL DFS data sheet. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, that's fine. Let's just dive into tonight's slate. So as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And up top, we have Gardner Minshew at $11,000. And both these guys are a bit pricey, which I don't love. But with it being a showdown slate, we're going to have some interest in these guys. And Gardner Minshew is really not been that bad for DFS purposes. Now, I don't love that the Jaguars play like super slow. Like if you're looking at their pace this season, they're running a play every 32 seconds, which is some of the slowest in the entire league. Like just for reference, I believe the Cowboys are right around 20 seconds, so they're 12 seconds off that pace. But he still has 3 passing touchdowns per game so far, 256 passing yards per game, and a very nice 75% completion percentage. Now, he only missed like 1 pass in week 1, so it's going to be a little bit skewed, but he's not having a bad season so far. 115 QBR, and overall, for the matchup-wise, the Dolphins are 32nd DVOA versus the pass and allowing over 30 Draftkings points per game to quarterbacks, 286 passing yards per game, and 2 passing touchdowns per game as well. And also keep in mind that the Dolphins are going to be losing Byron Jones for this game, which is also going to be a boost for the passing game for the Jaguars. So I think Minshew is certainly in play here and probably someone you're going to want to throw into the flex spot. Then Ryan Fitzpatrick at $10,200. It's also a pretty good matchup versus Jacksonville, who pretty much just let Ryan Tannehill carve them up last week. And looking at their numbers this season, they're 31st DVOA versus the pass, allowing 23.3 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, over 300 passing yards per game, and 2.5 passing touchdowns per game as well. Now, if we're looking at Fitzpatrick's numbers this season, he's throwing the ball 38 times per game, 259 passing yards, a passing touchdown per game. Nothing too spectacular, and I wouldn't really say I'm that confident in the Dolphins' offense. But still, it's a showdown slate, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's always got the upside. He's got the upside of throwing 4+ touchdowns. He also has the downside of throwing like 5 or 6 interceptions. The guy will just chuck the ball. He doesn't really care where it ends up. But it's kind of the fun of rostering Fitzpatrick because you know he's going to throw the ball quite a bit, and he's not afraid to throw the ball downfield. And he's got some decent options to throw the ball to, and Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, and Mike Gesicki. So I think he's fine, and both quarterbacks are certainly playable here. Just according to the numbers this season, both these defenses have been pretty bad versus the pass. I know the Dolphins' secondary is supposed to be improved, but they are going to be missing some key pieces in the secondary, which is going to give a boost to Gardner Minshew. Now, keep in mind that DJ Chark is questionable for this game, and if he happens to miss, that's obviously going to be a downgrade for Minshew because he's their best wide receiver, even though he's not getting a ton of targets so far this season, but still it would be a downgrade nonetheless if Chark happens to miss. But we'll talk about that when the time comes, when we get to the wide receivers. I think we can move on to the running backs. Probably not going to play these two in the captain spot. I mean, yeah, obviously they're fine flex spots, and I would prefer Minshew over Fitzpatrick here. But I don't know. I'd rather just fit in like one of the running backs or the wide receivers in the flex spot, or even in the captain spot, or even one of the tight ends on this slate. Or if you think this game's going to be like a 20-point total, you could use one of the defenses, but I really don't think that's going to be the case. But I think we'll just move on to the running backs at this point. I believe James Robinson at $7,800. He's the most expensive back on this slate. He's probably going to be someone you're just going to want to jam in for the most part. He's the bell cow running back for the Jaguars. He's going to handle the majority of the touches on the ground. Chris Thompson will be involved in the passing game a little bit, but even then, it's not going to be anything too spectacular. So, James Robinson versus a pretty bad Miami defense so far this season. If you're looking at their numbers versus their run, they're at 31st DVOA versus the run this season, allowing nearly 20 DraftKings points per game to running backs, over 100 rushing yards per game. And James Robinson, I wouldn't say he's been that bad so far. He's getting 16 rushing attempts per game, 82 rushing yards, half a touchdown per game, and also gets 2.5 targets per game with 5.10 yards per carry and 23 receiving yards. So James Robinson really hasn't been that bad. They're also 3-point favorites at homes here, so it could be a positive game script if they can get to the lead early. And I don't think James Robinson is the worst player in the world. He's definitely not the best, but hey, he's going to get the ball around 20 times in this game at $7,800 on a showdown slate. You can sign me up for that. If this was like a main slate, I'm probably not playing James Robinson, but given that it's a one-game slate, I think he's actually a pretty solid play here. Then dropping down to Myles Gaskin here at 7,200. He's probably the best option in the backfield for Miami, but he's also the most expensive option. But I would say he's the safest way to go in terms of touches if you're looking at his numbers this season. It's pretty split up for all these running backs, I will say. Like Howard's getting 6.5 rushing attempts per game. Matt Breida's at 6 rushing attempts per game. Gaskin's leading the three-headed monster, if that's what you want to call it, 8 rushing attempts per game. He's also getting quite a bit of targets as well. So he's definitely the running back you want in this backfield, but he's also the most expensive one by quite a bit. But still, 43 rushing yards per game. Again, nothing pretty, but 5 yards per carry, 5.5 targets per game, which is what I want to see, a 14% target share, a 21% weighted opportunity share, 5 catches per game, and 31 receiving yards. So either way the game script goes, he should be fine here. I really think this game is going to get too out of hand, and I would say he's the safest option in this backfield. And we know the Jaguars' defense last season was awful versus the run. So far this year, they haven't been too bad, and they did stifle Derrick Henry last week too, so I'll give them credit. I mean, they are 10th DVA versus the run this season, but they're still allowing 30 Draftkings points per game to the position, 88 rushing yards and half a touchdown per game, and 71 receiving yards per game as well. But I think Gaskin, I think he's a fine play, but I would much rather play. If it came down to either James Robinson or Myles Gaskin for you, I'm picking James Robinson pretty much 10 out of 10 times just because the volume's going to be safer, and we know he's not going to be splitting carries in the backfield. So, I mean, he's okay, but, I mean, this whole backfield is just really messy. Like, Howard, he's going to get a few touches. Matt Breida's going to get some touches. You also have Patrick Laird, who I don't really think he's going to do anything, but it's just really a gross situation for all these guys. I kind of just went over the numbers for the Miami backfield, so I don't really think we have to keep going on about it. I mean, Howard's actually averaging a 1 rushing touchdown per game, but you can't really count on touchdowns to keep coming, and the volume's just really not there for the most part. We know he's not going to be able to passing game. I mean, 6.5 rushing attempts, if you can get a goal line carry, sure, he might fall into the end zone, and in a showdown slate, it might be worth it if you're playing multiple lineups. If I'm playing one lineup, I'd have a hard time justifying playing Jordan Howard here. So anyway, going down to Chris Thompson, he's 2,600. He's not going to get a lot of work here, and he's actually averaging, I mean, 1 rushing attempt per game, which is obviously very, very low, and only 3 targets per game, which is only half a target more than James Robinson. So it's not like he's been like the huge receiving threat here. It's pretty much just been the James Robinson show for the most part. But at only 2,600, I think he's totally in play just because of how cheap he is. And look, if he can get me a couple of carries and around 3 targets, which is what he's averaging, if he can get me like 2 to 5 targets in this game, which 5 is going to be on the higher end. I don't expect 5, but if he can get, his average 3 targets per game and 13 receiving yards and 2.5 catches, that's not that bad at 2,600. He's got a 9% target share in the season, which again is not that great, 17% weighted opportunity share, but he's cheap, and I think he is somewhat playable here just as a salary relief option. He should be able to get the ball at least maybe a handful of times in this game. Then Matt Breida, 1,800. Again, this is just a really messy situation for the Dolphins. It's going to be hard to project these guys because I think just about any of these guys could do at least a little bit in this game. But, I mean, good luck figuring out. I mean, Gaskin's obviously the best option, but it's still just kind of a mess here for the most part. Brady's been getting 6 carries per game, 29 rushing yards per game, 4.9 yards per carry. Not really involved in the passing game. We know he's a capable pass catcher, but he's only getting half a target per game and only 1 receiving yard per game as of right now, and only a 2% target share. The matchup's good versus Jaguars, but I mean, it's just a really messy situation here, and I was not looking forward to breaking down the running backs when it came to this slate, because when I figured out who was playing the Thursday night game this weekend earlier on in the week, I was like, oh, gross. I'm going to talk about the run game here, but we're going to have to, I mean, someone's probably going to have a decent game here for the Dolphins. If I had to guess, it's probably going to be Gaskin, but it would not surprise me if Howard or Matt Breida did a little bit of damage as well, but still just a very messy situation. Patrick Laird, I'm probably just not going to play Patrick Laird. I think he's done like one thing this season. He's got averaging 1 target per game. He's got 4.5 receiving yards per game with a 2% target share and 0 carries on the season. So, I mean, I would just rather pay $800 more for Matt Breida because we at least know he's going to get some work in this game. And the guys below that, you're just not playing them for the most part. I can't really recommend playing any of these guys. So move on to the wide receivers. Then we have DJ Chark at 9,400. Now, he's the big question mark in this game because if he doesn't play, he's going to open up some value, I would say. And the kind of odd thing with DJ Chark right now is he's not really getting that many targets so far. Only 3.5 targets per game. He's caught them all, 3.5 receptions per game, but 54 receiving yards and really just not doing too much. Only a 10% target share and 8 out of 12.4, so they're going to him down the field, but he's also questionable for this game. So if he's out, you can get a boost to guys like Laviska Shenault, Keelan Cole, Chris Conley, who are actually already outpacing him in targets right now, which I wouldn't expect to continue over the course of the season, but it's still something to keep in mind that he's just really not getting targeted too much. But again, if he plays, it's going to be a pretty good spot here. Now, it's going to help that Byron Jones is out, but they also have Xavier Howard. But I still think Chark would be okay here. If you're looking at the Dolphins this season versus the past, they are 32nd DVA versus that, which is the absolute worst. They're allowing nearly 50 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, over 220 receiving yards per game, and 1.5 receiving touchdowns per game as well to the position. So this is a pretty good spot for Chark if he's good to go. And obviously, if he's healthy and looks good in the warm-ups, yeah, I think he'll be a fine option. But at 9,400, you are pushing a little bit on the salary, and the targets have certainly not been there. So I wouldn't say he's an absolute lock, but he would be a fine option nonetheless. But I'm really hoping those targets would rise, because if he's only getting 4 targets here, I mean, that's not going to be worth the 9,400 price tag unless he happens to find the end zone once or twice. Devontae Parker here, 8,400. So last season with Ryan Fitzpatrick, these guys ended on an absolute tear. Like, Devontae Parker was looking like one of the best wide receivers in football. He's going to be healthy heading into the week. I would say he's kind of banged up for the first 2 weeks, but he should be good to go here. And this is a pretty good matchup here versus Jacksonville. If you're looking at their numbers this season versus the past, you're at 31st due versus that, 32.1 points per game to wide receivers, 131 receiving yards per game, which isn't bad, but still, this should be a pretty beatable matchup here with Devontae Parker. And we know Ryan Fitzpatrick is not afraid to chug Parker the ball deep or wherever. He's got 118 air yards on the season, a 15% target share, which is actually pretty low, but still, we know Devontae Parker, when he's fully healthy, can certainly do a lot of damage. Getting 6 targets per game so far. Had a pretty decent game last week. He got into the end zone. So Parker, I think he's fine. If you're using Fitzpatrick, obviously he's a fantastic stacking option, but again, it's a showdown slate. So a lot of these guys are decent plays, but I do like Parker here at 8,400 versus the Jaguars defense. Preston Williams, 6,800. He's been doing fine. He's getting a lot of the air yards here for the Dolphins. An 8 out of 13.1, 157 air yards so far, a 27% market share of the team's air yards. The same exact target shares as Devontae Parker, but he is getting the ball. They're trying to get him the ball deep. Now, he's only averaging 1.5 receptions per game on 5 targets. But again, this is a solid matchup. He's also quite a bit cheaper than Devontae Parker. Obviously, I'd prefer Parker over Preston Williams if price doesn't matter, but I do realize pricing is an issue here. But I think Preston Williams is fine, but again, not something I'm too in love with. Laviska Shenault here at 6,600. I think he's actually going to be a very good option here, especially if DJ Chark is out. If DJ Chark is in, I think he's still fine, but it's not like he's getting a ton of volume so far this season. Only 4 targets per game, which is a 12.5 target share. 8 out of 10, which is all right, but 36 receiving yards per game on 3 catches per game. It's nothing too crazy, but if DJ Chark happens to be out, Shenault would be a pretty good play. And if Chark is in, he should avoid Xavier Howard for the most part. So, and then you have Byron Jones out, so it's going to be a boost for him. So I think Shenault is fine. Keelan Cole, 5,400, another guy who's outpacing DJ Chark in targets so far this season. He's got 6 targets per game on 5.5 catches, 52 receiving yards, and an 18% target share, which does lead all these Jaguars receivers. 38% weight opportunity share, and this is a pretty good matchup versus the Dolphins. Probably sound like a broken record, but it's the same matchup for all of these guys for the most part, so it's the same thing, so I'm not going to keep going through that, but just know all these Jaguars receivers are in a pretty decent spot here versus Miami, especially with Byron Jones missing this game. Then going down to Isaiah Ford here at 3,000, he seems a bit too cheap for the production he's done this season. He's getting 6.5 targets per game so far, and then last week he saw 9 targets, caught 7 of those for 76 yards, and had 14.6 fantasy points, which is actually pretty darn good. He's also got an 18.75% target share on the season, 38% weighted opportunity share. Doesn't get the ball downfield too much, but still, I think he's okay, especially at $3,000 in a pretty good matchup here versus the Jaguars. So I think Isaiah Ford's fine. Chris Conley, again, he's getting more targets than DJ Chark so far. I know it's only a 2-game sample size, but still, he's getting 4 targets per game. The numbers are going to look too pretty, but if DJ Chark happens to be out, he's definitely going to be a pretty good value at 2,200. Grant here at 1,400. Again, not going to be a lot of volume here. Only 2 targets per game so far with 2 catches per game, but overall, these numbers are going to be pretty gross. But I mean, it seems like on all these primetime games, there's always like a random guy that catches a touchdown, like we saw with the Raiders. Gold got into the end zone, Zay Jones got into the end zone, so it would not surprise me if one of these scrubs, like Grant, happened to find the end zone. But if you need a punt play, I wouldn't say he's the absolute worst play in the world. And the rest of these guys, it's just going to be hard to trust them. You're kind of just hoping they happen to get in the game and catch a random touchdown and salvage your day, which we've seen it happen in the past couple of primetime games, so I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's just not very likely. Now we'll move on to the tight end position, which I wouldn't say is the best here. But we have like Gesicki here at 7,400, who's coming off a very monstrous game versus the Bills. Definitely don't expect that each and every single week, but the guy looked pretty good. If I can pull up the exact targets he had, I'm pretty sure it was around 12. So week 2 last week versus Buffalo, he scored 30 DraftKings points, had 8 catches for 130 yards with a receiving touchdown on 11 targets. I mean, I can't expect that every week. The week prior, he only had 5 targets, which I wouldn't say that's awful. I mean, it's not like he's Travis Kelce out here, but the guy had an excellent game, which is always going to boost these numbers. I can't expect him to get 7.5 targets per game with a 21% target share every week and 176 air yards and having a 31% market share of the team's air yards, but the guy had a fantastic game. And look, this is a soft matchup versus Jacksonville. They are a team that is struggling versus the pass so far this season, and they're allowing 22.4 DraftKings points per game to the position on 99 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown per game as well. And Johnny Smith absolutely just destroyed those guys last week with 2 receiving touchdowns and overall a very, very strong game. So I think Gesicki's fine. He's just a bit pricey. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, so it's probably going to be hard to fit him in your lineups. But if you got nice value and you want to fit in Gesicki, I have no issue with that at all. I think there's a halfway decent chance he can find the end zone in this game. Tyler Eifert at 5,800. Not a high volume guy, but he is getting quite a bit of air yards so far. Now he only has 3.5 targets per game, but he's got an 8 out of 12.7, 89 air yards, and a 20% market share of the team's air yards so far. So I like the upside with the air yards. That's not too bad. It's not like he's getting dinked and dunked here from Gardner Minshew. And I will say the matchup versus Miami, they're not allowing much to tight ends so far. They are 32nd DVA versus the pass, which is great for obviously the Jaguars, but only 7.2 points per game to the tight end position and only 32 receiving yards per game as well. But you also have to keep in mind they played the Patriots and the Bills, which really don't have tight ends that are really too fantasy relevant. So I would kind of say that those numbers are a bit noisy there. So I think Tyler Eifert, I think he's a fine option. And I do like the Jaguars offense here versus Miami. Obviously, they have the higher team total at 25.5. I'd say Eifert's got a decent chance of finding the end zone. Then O'Shaughnessy here and Adam Shaheen. I mean, you're just kind of hoping these guys get those random bootleg touchdowns where they leak out of blocking and just happen to get a bootleg touchdown for the most part. These guys aren't going to get a ton of volume, but O'Shaughnessy, he is getting 2.5 targets per game, which isn't bad. 2.5 receptions per game and 20 receiving yards. You're just kind of hoping for a random touchdown for these guys to pay off, but they are pretty cheap. And as for Shaheen, he's getting 1 target per game and half a catch per game so far and only a 2% target share, so you really can't expect these guys to be too involved in the passing game. So it's really just Gesicki and Eifert here, but O'Shaughnessy, I wouldn't say he's the worst value player, kind of just hoping he happens to find his way into the end zone. And I would play any of these guys below those guys. I mean, you could play guys like O'Shaughnessy and Shaheen, but after that, I just really wouldn't have much interest at all. And as for the defenses, I actually think this game has a decent chance to be somewhat high scoring. Vegas does as well with a 48-point over-under. If you had to pick a defense, I would side with the Jaguars just because they're the home defense, but they are pretty pricey here at 6,400. And that just seems a bit much for a team that's had 6 and 0 fantasy points so far and just allowed 33 points versus the Titans last week. So I can't see myself paying $6,400 for the Jaguars defense. And if you want to get contrarian and hope for a pick 6 or something, sure, go for it. But just projection-wise, that's not going to grade out too well. And as for the Dolphins defense, it's just not that great. And again, I'm going to be having quite a bit of interest in a lot of these Jaguars players. So it wouldn't really make sense to stack the Jags and then play the defense that they're going against. And then the kickers, they're the kickers. You can't really project kickers for the most part, but if you think this turns into a field goal fest, which it certainly could, Jaguars and Dolphins just on paper sounds like there's going to be a lot of field goals. So Lambeau and Sanders are both fine. I prefer Lambeau over Sanders just because he's on the higher team total, but again, I mean, they're just kickers, and you're kind of getting lucky with those guys for the most part. Just got to hope they hit their field goals. But that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be my lineup building, or my final thoughts video. Then I'll have my lineup building video, and then we'll do the core plays video on Sunday morning. So I'll see you guys then, and I do appreciate all of you guys watching.